During tricep extension, gravity plays a huge part. Gravity is acting on the weight throughout each of these exercises. During the eccentric phase, or the lowering, the role of gravity is to pull down the weight towards the floor, creating tensile force. The concentric phase involves the use of compressive internal force, ultimately resulting in the recruitment of joint reaction force in order to bring the weight back up to the top of the exercise through extension of the joint of the elbow. When you lower the weight, you move it closer to the center of gravity in this exercise. We are actually making the movement of this exercise much easier as we are not only lowering the center of gravity of the body, but we're recruiting the glenohumeral joint to assist in this movement. The relative base of support remains unchanged, while the line of gravity is slightly changed in this alteration, much in the same way that the center of gravity is lowered, placing less tensile force on the tricep muscles themselves. So here we are changing the center of gravity, bringing it higher up on the body as we are putting our arms above our head. We're not using the glenohumeral joint for movement, it is merely being used here for stabilization. Now the base of support was left unchanged while the line of gravity is changed in this alteration of the original exercise, creating much more tensile force on the eccentric phase of the lift, placing much more emphasis on the tricep muscles. Once again, the role of gravity is significant in this exercise as it is active throughout. That being said, when raising the weight from its neutral position during the concentric phase, shear force comes into play as we start to near the top of this exercise. The quadricep muscles are being fully contracted, and the only thing preventing the bones and muscles from tearing away from the joint are the ligaments. Like with most eccentric phases of any exercise, the internal force known as tensile force is being used to lower the weight back down to its neutral position. One easy way of regression for this exercise is to shorten the range of motion. By shortening the range of motion, we are placing less shear force on the muscle and the joint of the knee. Other than that, there isn't a lot of manipulation of biomechanics going on here. In the progression of this exercise, the use of only one leg is being applied. While the weight remains the same as exercise, we are now isolating each individual leg in order to train the quadriceps better, thus being able to work on any weaknesses one may have. Again, we aren't manipulating much else in regards to the biomechanics here. Here we have the push-up, which is a closed kinetic chain exercise. Gravity obviously plays a great deal of stress on the body throughout this exercise, but the more important forces that play key roles in this exercise are going on within the body. Starting from neutral, we lower ourselves towards the ground in a controlled fashion during the eccentric phase. During this time, we are lengthening the pectoralis and tricep muscles while we are shortening the biceps and the anterior deltoids, creating tensile force as well as compressive forces. Once we are at the bottom of the range of motion, we must then explosively push ourselves away from the floor during the concentric phase of this exercise. We contract the pectoralis and tricep muscles in order to create a compressive force, while the opposing muscles of the bicep and anterior deltoids are being lengthened. Here we have the regression of this exercise. We go on our knees, which changes all three major biomechanical concepts. It changes the base of support, so now we have our knees and our hands as well as our feet, making the base of support much larger, thus making the exercise easier. We are also changing both the center of gravity and the line of gravity in this exercise. By bringing both of them up much higher, more towards the muscles that are actually doing the work, the exercise is much easier. The progression of this exercise will be to create a situation in which we are performing this exercise upon an uneven surface. The line of gravity remains unchanged, but the body center of gravity is changed slightly as it would move slightly towards the hand that is on the uneven surface. The base of support would be changed as well, as it would now have one of the hands being placed on a round, unstable object, bringing far more recruitment of the anterior deltoid as a stabilizing muscle. The squat is another example I use of a closed kinetic chain exercise. During the back squat, we are placing a load on the shoulders, thus immediately creating a compressive internal force in the body. Another major force that comes into play is the role of gravity, as it is constantly working against you and as you lower yourself down and push yourself back up. During the eccentric phase of the squat, we begin to lower ourselves down into a correct anatomical position while we are controlling ourselves down. The different muscles in the legs balance each other out. The hamstrings contract and act as stabilizers to the quadriceps, which are being lengthened during this phase of the squat. The two sets of muscles working together create equilibrium so that we don't fall forward or backward during this exercise. Tensile force is being placed upon the knee joint as well as the hip joints as the quadriceps are being lengthened here. During the concentric phase, we end up contracting the muscles of the quadriceps while the opposing muscles of the hamstrings are being lengthened as the lower extremities return to proper extension. While the regression of this exercise is doing bodyweight squats, we are making this exercise physically easier by removing the added load that is placed upon the body in the standard back squat. We are also effectively changing the center of gravity, bringing it closer down towards the navel and hips, rather than much higher as it is in the typical back squat. The line of gravity as well as the base of support change very little in this alteration. The progression of the back squat is the front squat. We do not change the weight of the load, we are changing the place in which the load is acting upon. The load is being placed on the shoulders, which actually becomes an isolation exercise for the quadriceps, as the hamstrings do very little for the stabilization in this exercise. Another change you will notice is the added recruitment of the abdominal muscles. This is to replace hamstrings as a stabilizer so we do not fall over. The base of support is left unchanged as is the center of gravity, but the line of gravity is changed. Rather than it running evenly through the body, it is just slightly in front of the lateral malleolus. It now runs much more forward as the emphasis of gravity is placed more on the toes.